Sophie Dekkers, the Chief Commercial Officer at easyJet. Thank you so much for joining us on Phocuswright Europe this year. We're really pleased that you can join us, at least because, as I said before we started talking, I can't imagine what it's like trying to run a network carrier at the moment, especially one that's based in the UK with so many strange restrictions and stuff like that. So again, thank you very much for joining us, Sophie. So we'll dive straight in if we can. So, I mean, how do you get your head around planning over this particular phase and what you've been doing earlier on this year? Because it has been pretty chaotic.
It has, and do you know what? It changes every day, and it is very difficult to actually plan ahead. I think what we've tried to do is to mitigate some of the damage, I suppose, by focusing on domestics, because you can be more certain that domestics are going to be more secure. So that's where we've been doing a lot of putting French domestics, Italian domestics, UK domestics, and sort of boosting that part of the network to give us some protection, although that's a very, very small amount of what we're able to do. In terms of planning, we've had sort of rolling continuous program of network reviews, schedule changes, trying to make sure we're doing it at least 3 to 4 weeks out to give customers enough notification and time as well when we're cancelling the program. But it's very much swayed by government announcements, what's the latest thing that's being said, and then trying to react very quickly to it. So one of the things we do try and do is when we project that potentially a government are going to give a positive announcement like Portugal, we try and put capacity on sale so it's on sale ready for that announcement. I mean, what we saw with Portugal, for example, is we put 80,000 seats on sale that day on the Friday. At 5 o'clock, we saw the announcement from the government that Portugal had gone green. Between 5 o'clock and midnight, we sold 30,000 of those seats. Right. Was that people were just waiting for an announcement to go green, and obviously the demand was there, and the sales went through the roof. Interestingly, I think other carriers didn't add their capacity until Sunday, and at that point it started to die off. So there's one thing, it's about trying to predict as much as anybody can with a very murky crystal ball of what's going to happen, and that changes every day. And then obviously Portugal goes amber, and then we have to make changes again. So yeah, it's very difficult. The team are brilliant, and one of the things that they're finding actually is being able to make that amount of change short notice is actually quite energizing, although it's exhausting. And normally they're planning 18 months, 24 months out, and it's fairly static. And actually being able to have that dynamic changing every week is kind of giving them that sort of freedom to do things and test things and try routes that maybe you wouldn't do in a much more stable environment. So that the flip side of it is it's giving the team quite a lot of energy, being able to tactically move things and look at things that you wouldn't normally do.
Okay, so in the preamble for this session, it talks about headwinds and tailwinds that remain. I mean, I wonder if you've talked about, you know, I would imagine a tailwind of having 30,000 bookings in the space of 5 hours is probably a nice tailwind to have, and the headwinds being we don't know what's going to open up and close down very quickly. But are there any others that you can identify for us?
Yeah, I think one of the tailwinds we've got at the moment is being able to we've opened destination bases this year. So we had Palma already as a destination base where we have aircraft based en route. We opened Faro and Malaga this year as well, which was already planned. The great thing is we use that as a tailwind now. So where we had that capacity flying from Faro and Malaga into the UK, what we've done this week is actually switch that over into Europe. So we're actually just launching routes into Scandinavia from Palma, Faro and Malaga just this week. We're launching routes into regional Germany. So we're actually been able to, as a tailwind, those destination bases is perfect timing because we can flex more into Europe where the demand is, away from the UK where we're still on amber and green and red lists. So that's a tailwind. I think headwinds, testing and complexity of testing is still a massive headwind, and people being able to access testing, particularly down route. We saw that with Portugal when it went amber, people desperately trying to get tests so that they can get the flights back home. So that's still a headwind. We're lobbying government to remove the tax on testing. We've been able to get testing down to about £43 is the cheapest partnership we've got at the moment, but actually if you took the tax off that as well, it would bring it into the 30s, and then it's actually much more accessible for people. And things like partnering with Boots, so it's on the high street, again, to make it more accessible for people is something we've done too. So I think a headwind is still testing. And I think the other headwind is around lack of certainty for the UK passenger now. What's been demonstrated by Portugal has really unsettled, I think, people who perhaps, even if the government suddenly announce a massive list of green routes, it's still going to be slightly dampened because people are going to think, but it might go amber when I'm away. I don't want that uncertainty. So I think, unfortunately, what they've demonstrated with Portugal may be a big headwind for what happens for this summer now, even if lots of routes go green, because people don't want that uncertainty.
How have you approached your distribution strategy during this current phase? Are you working with partners differently? I mean, you went back on the GDS 7 or 8 years ago, and you've obviously, the whole business originally has been based on direct selling through easyjet.com, but how have you thought about distribution this time?
Yeah, so distribution was still very much going through the GDSs. Obviously, the amount of business travel that's going through the GDSs is a lot lower, as you'd expect. Interesting, we're still seeing quite a few SMEs going through the TMCs. So we're seeing quite a lot of SME traffic still happening. We haven't changed the strategy significantly. We're still working with third-party tour operators as well to secure series seat sales, which is what we typically do for the summer capacity. So we're looking ahead to next summer on that as well. So we still, very much advocate direct is best, and very much sort of drive that. And I think it's around 10% of our trade goes through indirect, but the majority is still very much sort of direct sales. But ideally, what we want is partners to link to us either via the GDS or directly via the API, and we'll work with them in that way, and we'll work constructively with partners that way, rather than doing too much blocking and so on as well.
easyJet, I mean, we've talked a lot on PhocusWire in particular about the role of NDC and the adoption or not adoption by some players of NDC. I mean, easyJet has not gone down that route. Is there a specific reason or a strategy behind that decision at this current time?
At the moment, the focus is still to get people to come direct and direct link via the API. So the volumes are so small, it's not really worth the effort and investment to connect into via NDC. The other thing is our booking system, eRes, which is a bespoke platform, makes it much more complicated to link in. So it would require quite a lot of investment. And actually, from our side, the volumes for easyJet aren't big enough to warrant it. And we have, partners such as working through Worldwide, where we use DoHop to connect and to serve kind of linking partners and so on that way. So that's much more of our approach at the moment. And to be honest, the investment required and the IT effort required doesn't necessarily yield the benefits for us, given we have such a small amount that goes in direct anyway.
Yeah, interesting. So if we can dare to look forward a little bit, I know that can be quite problematic given what we've been through the last 15, 16 months or so. But Sophie, I mean, what do you think the 2022 low-cost carrier looks like? Is it going to be fundamentally different to the easyJet or any low-cost carrier of 2019, say? Because, I think it's fair to say we should probably write off 2020 in the first half of this year. But next year, what's it going to look like?
Yeah, I think for us, a few different points to make there, I suppose. One is we're optimistic that if this summer demand continues to be soft and there still seems to be, we've already missed another summer, we've essentially had 5 winters in a row then, actually that pent-up demand for next summer could be huge. We know that from research we've done previously, and I remember doing it back in 2010, I think, and we've revisited it more recently, customers, the British customer in particular, will not give up their summer holiday, and they will give up other things, like in the research it showed they would not buy a new car, they would even forfeit buying their children's shoes to be able to have their summer holiday. It's to that extent that is a protected 2-week summer holiday in the school holidays is something that the British person protects over and above other things. So given they've not been able to do that for 2 years, we do know that people have made savings. So we're seeing for next year potentially this almost super spike year, and then what we might see is that tailing off into 23 and beyond into a much more standard sort of regular growth, year-on-year growth. But you could see a phenomenal summer next year. So one of the things we're looking at is how much could we ramp up, and how could we ramp up quickly if we saw those sorts of signals. And then also in terms of, I guess, what it's going to look like from a low-cost carrier. I mean, we've introduced the cabin bag policy, the cabin bag charge on extra for people to bring a large bag with the upfront seats. And then what we're going to be doing in October is introducing the ability for people to bring that bag with any seat linked onto the plane. So at the moment, the way we could get it quick to market was to link it to those upfront and extra legroom seats, so the first 6 to 8 rows. In October, we'll be bringing it in so that you can opt to bring that bag with any seat and be able to buy that as a standalone product. So that's, I guess, kind of slight change in where we're going and what we're doing there in terms of developing that part of ancillaries.
It's interesting because you mentioned ancillaries there. I mean, there's been some changes amongst the low-cost carriers in the US, and you talked there about the way you're thinking about changing your own ancillaries. Is that something that is going to last, do you think, or is it kind of back to business as usual once we get into 2022, 2024 and 2023, I beg your pardon?
I think things like those sorts of ancillaries will stick. I mean, other airlines have already introduced it, and as you say, the US carriers have done it as well. And I think I read yesterday that Aer Lingus are looking to introduce it on their flight. So I think it's the direction of travel. And I guess that sort of, for me, relates back to when we brought in allocated seating as a low-cost airline. We were the first low-cost airline to do it. Everyone thought that was going to break the model of on-time performance, and how could you possibly get everyone on board if they're not running with their trainers on to get their seat in the plane? But actually what we proved is it improved the customer experience, and it was a really good revenue stream. So I think it's one direction, and everyone, obviously the other airlines all took on that same approach. So I think it's the same with cabin bags going forward. I think the opportunities as well will be in-flight retail and how that becomes digitized, how you can better stock manage on board. So, you can order from your seat and you can see live stock availability. So you don't have that issue that when the trolley gets to you and they say, oh, sorry, we haven't got any bacon baguettes yet left. You don't then go, oh, do you know what? Don't worry about it, because actually you've maybe seen already on the app, okay, they've sold out of that, I'm going to select something else, and you've done it in your own time. So I think that will be a really good opportunity, and linked to that would be personalization on board as well, and pre-ordering. So I think that's the direction, the big direction change for low cost and for the industry will be digitization of the customer experience. So in flight, but as well as kind of going from your door and checking in online all the way through to the plane, using the app and having it in your hands. So the other thing we're developing is a disruption management tool. If your flight is cancelled, you can manage it on your phone in the airport. So it will say, this is a hotel you can book yourself into, here's your taxi that you can have. So no one's actually having to pay for anything themselves. It's all automated, it's all through the app. There's no then claims back through the contact center, so there's not that additional hassle for the customer or cost for the airline. And also we can then have negotiated rates at all those hotels, so we're not having customers turning up and paying rack rates. We've already negotiated the rate. So kind of digitizing the whole end-to-end journey, I think, will be really accelerated, and we'll be launching all of those components in the next 12 months.
And again, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I mean, if we cast our eyes towards Southeast Asia and what AirAsia is doing with its big rewards loyalty program, which is what you've just discussed, but with everything else on top. I mean, they're arguably quite an outlier there, but if it works, it's quite a compelling vision, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think loyalty is something we keep looking at, and are very conscious that we don't want to do a loyalty scheme with points, because that becomes very complex and expensive. But we do want to recognise people who are frequent flyers, and so it's how you personalise the experience for them. So you recognise them on board, they have that sense of feeling a bit more special and that familiarity, and maybe it's about giving them a free coffee or something like that, rather than a complex kind of point scheme that you can never redeem and it costs a lot for the business to run. Let's look at that whole personalisation and CRM part of it and make people feel special without it costing the end of the world.
And lastly, if we can, Sophie, I mean, if you take a step back and take your easyJet cap off for a second and look at just the wider aviation world, I mean, do you sense that the industry as a whole is trying to take the most of the opportunity that it's had to look at the way things are run and fix some of the things that are still broken? Or do you sense that everyone is so desperate to get back to business as usual?
Yeah, I think everyone is trying to look at what are the positives that we can take out of this, if there are any. And we're using the time, and I'm sure other airlines are doing the same. We're using the time to have a look at how do we build in agility for the longer term? That's the key thing for me and the team, and I'm sure other airlines are doing the same. We've had this phenomenal agility.
Just if I may, how do you define agility?
The ability, for me, it's the ability from a network perspective to respond very quickly to demand changes, to competitor changes, to be able to flex the network by the day almost. And actually, how do we build that agility in a structural way going forward, so it's not exhausting and actually still gives us that kind of very, very quick to market, very quick sort of tangible way of being able to respond to changes of demand that, as I say, normally you're planning so far out you don't get that opportunity. So for us, and I'm sure other airlines, it's taking some of the madness of this year and saying how do we take the best bits of that and retain those going forward without going back to maybe completely switching back to how we used to be.
Are you fairly optimistic about that?
I think so. I think we can do it. I mean, other airlines in the US, Southwest do it. They have 30 aircraft that they schedule in the last 90 days, and they do it out to their 700 fleet. So why could we do something like that and take some of that best practice and share that and see how we can use that going forward?
Okay. The most encouraging, perhaps, part of this interview is knowing that I can tell the kids I'm not going to buy their school shoes and go on holiday next year. So thank you very much for that. But on a more serious note, Sophie Dekkers from easyJet, thank you so much for joining us at Phocuswright Europe this year. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Kevin.